Cesar Chavez. Like so many who have worked from early childhood, particularly in the open country, he appears older than his 41 years. His manner is diffident, his voice soft. He is president of the United Farm Workers of America, UFWA. It is, unlike craft and industrial unions, a quite new labor fraternity. In contrast to these others, agricultural workers, those who follow the crops, have been excluded from many of the benefits that came along with the New Deal. Oh, I remember having to move out of our house. My father had brought in a team of horses and wagon. We had always lived in that house, and we couldn't understand why we were moving out. When we got to the other house, it was a worse house, a poor house. That must have been around 1934. I was about 6 years old. It's known as the North Gila Valley, about 50 miles north of Yuma. My dad was being turned out of his small plot of land. He had inherited this from his father, who had homesteaded it. I saw my 3 other uncles also moving out, and for the same reason. The bank had foreclosed on the loan. If the local bank approved, the government would guarantee the loan, and small farmers like my father would continue in business. It so happened the president of the bank was the guy who most wanted our land. We were surrounded by him. He owned all the land around us. Of course he wouldn't pass the loan. One morning a giant tractor came in like we had never seen before. My daddy used to do all his work with horses. So this huge tractor came in and began to knock down this small corral where my father kept his horses. We didn't understand why. In the matter of a week, the whole face of the land was changed. Ditches were dug, and it was different. I didn't like it much. We all of us climbed into an old Chevy that my dad had. And then we were in California, and migratory workers. There were 5 kids, a small family by those standards. It must have been around 36. I was about 8. Well, it was a strange life. We had been poor, but we knew every night there was a bed there, and that this was our room. There was a kitchen. It was sort of a settled life, and we had chickens and hogs, eggs, and all those things. But that all of a sudden changed. When you're small, you can't figure these things out. You know something's not right, and you don't like it, but you don't question it, and you don't let that get you down. You sort of just continue to move. But this had quite an impact on my father. He had been used to owning the land, and all of a sudden there was no more land. What I heard, what I made out of conversations between my mother and my father, things like, we'll work this season, and then we'll get enough money, and we'll go and buy a piece of land in Arizona. Things like that became like a habit. He never gave up hope that someday he would come back and get a little piece of land. I can understand very, very well this feeling. These conversations were sort of melancholy. I guess my brothers and my sisters could also see this very sad look on my father's face. That piece of land he wanted? No, never. It never happened. He stopped talking about that some years ago. The drive for land, it's a very powerful drive. When we moved to California, we would work after school. Sometimes we wouldn't go. Following the crops, we missed much school. Trying to get enough money to stay alive the following winter. The whole family picking apricots, walnuts, prunes. We were pretty new. We had never been migrant workers. We were taken advantage of quite a bit by the labor contractor and the crew pusher. In some ways, pretty silly ways. Sometimes we can't help but laugh about it. We trusted everybody that came around. You're traveling in California with all your belongings in your car. It's obvious. Those days we didn't have a trailer. This is bait for the labor contractor. Anywhere we stopped, there was a labor contractor offering all kinds of jobs and good wages, and we were always deceived by them, and we always went. Trust them. Coming into San Jose, not finding, being lied to, that there was work. We had no money at all, and had to live on the outskirts of town under a bridge in Dry Creek. That wasn't really unbearable. What was unbearable was so many families living just a quarter of a mile. And you know how kids are. They'd bring in those things that really hurt us quite a bit. Most of those kids were middle-class families. We got hooked on a real scheme once. We were going to Fresno on our way to Delano. We stopped at some service station and this labor contractor saw the car. He offered a lot of money. We went. We worked the first week. The grapes were pretty bad and we couldn't make much. We all stayed off from school in order to make some money. Saturday we were to be paid, and we didn't get paid. He came and said the winery hadn't paid him. We'd have money next week. He gave us $10. My dad took the $10 and went to the store and bought $10 worth of groceries. So we worked another week, and in the middle of the second week, my father was asking him for his last week's pay, and he had the same excuse. This went on, and we get $5 or $10 or $7 a week for about 4 weeks, for the whole family. So one morning, my father made the resolution, no more work. If he doesn't pay us, we won't work. We got in a car and went over to see him. The house was empty. He had left. The winery said they had paid him, and they showed us where they had paid him. This man had taken it. Labor strikes were everywhere. We were one of the strikingest families, I guess. My dad didn't like the conditions, and he began to agitate. Some families would follow, and we'd go elsewhere. Sometimes we'd come back. We couldn't find a job elsewhere, so we'd come back. Sort of beg for a job. Employers would know, and they would make it very humiliating. Did these strikes ever win? Never. We were among those families who always honored somebody else's grievance. Somebody would have a personal grievance with the employer. He'd say, "I'm not going to work for this man." Even though we were working, we'd honor it. We felt we had to. So we'd walk out too, because we were prepared to honor those things. And so we caused many of the things ourselves. If we were picking at a piece rate and we knew they were cheating on the weight, we wouldn't stand for it. So we'd lose the job, and we'd go elsewhere. There were other families like that. Sometimes, when you had to come back, the contractor knew this. They knew it, and they rubbed it in quite well. Sort of shameful to come back. We were trapped. We'd have to do it for a few days to get enough money to get enough gas. One of the experiences I had. We went through Indio, California. Along the highway, there were signs in most of the small restaurants that said, "White trade only." My dad read English, but he didn't really know the meaning. He went in to get some coffee, a pot that he had, to get some coffee for my mother. He asked us not to come in, but we followed him anyway. And this young waitress said, "We don't serve Mexicans here. Get out of here." I was there, and I saw it and heard it. She paid no more attention. I'm sure for the rest of her life she never thought of it again. But every time we thought of it, it hurt us. So we got back in the car, and we had a difficult trying... In fact, we never got the coffee. These are sort of unimportant, but you'll remember them very well. One time, there was a little diner across the tracks in Brawley. We used to shine shoes after school. Saturday was a good day. We used to shine shoes for 3 cents, 2 cents. Hamburgers were then, as I remember, 7 cents. There was this little diner all the way across town. The moment we stepped across the tracks, the police stopped us. They would let us go there to what we called the American town, the Anglo town, with a shoeshine box. We went to this little place and we walked in. There was this young waitress again, with either her boyfriend or someone close, because they were involved in conversation. And there was this familiar sign again, but we paid no attention to it. She looked up at us and so sort of... It wasn't what she said, it was just a gesture. A sort of gesture of total rejection. Her hands, and the way she turned her face away from us. She said, "What do you want?" So we told her we'd like to buy 2 hamburgers. She sort of laughed, sarcastic sort of laughed, and she said, "Oh, we don't sell to Mexicans. Why don't you go across to Mexican town? You can buy them over there." And then she turned around and continued her conversation. She never knew how much she was hurting us, but it stayed with us. We'd go to school 2 days a week, sometimes. 2 weeks, 3 weeks at most. This is when we were migrating. We'd come back to our winter base, and if we were lucky, we'd get in a solid all of January, February, March, April, and May. So we had 5 months out of a possible 9 months. We started counting how many schools we'd been to, and we counted 37. Elementary schools. From 1st to 8th grade, 37. We never got a transfer. Friday, we didn't tell the teacher or anything. We'd just go home. And they accepted this. I remember one teacher. I wondered why she was asking so many questions. In those days, anybody asked questions, you became suspicious. Either a cop or a social worker. She was a young teacher, and she just wanted to know why we were behind. One day, she drove into the camp. That was quite an event, because we never had a teacher come over. Never. So it was, a very meaningful day for us. This I remember. Some people put this out of their minds and forget it. I don't. I don't want to forget it. I don't want it to take the best of me. But I want to be there, because this is what happened. This is the truth, history.